Ted Bundy, a Washington state resident, was convicted last year of the kidnap assault of a young woman from Salt Lake City.
After Bundy's convicted of the kidnapping at Peril Garage, detectives have found evidence linking him to the murder of Karen Cantor.
Killer Ted Bundy was executed in the state of Florida. One woman who survived being attacked by him says she had the opportunity to bear witness, but chose to move on instead.
In the early 1970s, young women began disappearing from college campuses and public places across the United States. There were no forced entries, no screams reported, no immediate signs of violence. In many cases, witnesses remembered seeing the victims leave calmly, willingly, with someone they appeared to trust. That detail confused investigators. The man they were last seen with did not behave like a criminal. He did not threaten them. He did not chase them. He spoke politely. He looked educated. He asked for help in broad daylight, surrounded by people. And people helped him. He introduced himself clearly. He explained his situation calmly. Sometimes he appeared injured. Sometimes he asked for a small favor. Nothing about the interaction felt dangerous. Nothing triggered fear. Witnesses later described him as well-spoken, intelligent, and charming. Someone you would not think twice about trusting. Someone who blended easily into public spaces without drawing attention. That man was Ted Bundy. Bundy did not force his way into anyone's life. He relied on cooperation. He relied on trust. He relied on the assumption that danger announces itself clearly. It doesn't. When women went missing, the early explanations were simple. They must have left voluntarily. They must have decided to go somewhere else. There was no immediate reason to believe a crime had occurred. That assumption bought him time. By the time patterns began to emerge, the damage was already done. The same calm, polite behavior that earned trust also delayed suspicion. The same intelligence that impressed people helped him avoid scrutiny. This was not a criminal hiding in shadows. This was someone operating openly in public, using trust as a weapon. What makes this story disturbing is not just what happened next, but how easily it was allowed to happen. Ted Bundy didn't look like a killer. People trusted him. And that is why he kept getting away. Ted Bundy was not a name uncovered suddenly or in hindsight. By the late 1970s, authorities would identify him as an active serial offender whose crimes spanned several years in multiple states. His confirmed activity stretched roughly from 1974 to 1978, a period during which he managed to avoid sustained detection. What made Bundy especially dangerous was not just the number of victims, but the way his crimes blended into normal life. He did not operate in one fixed location. He moved frequently, shifting between Washington, Utah, Colorado, and later Florida. Each move reset attention and scattered responsibility. The people he targeted shared a clear vulnerability. Most were young women, many of them college students, living independent lives in public environments where trust was assumed. They were not isolated in hidden places. They disappeared from campuses, streets, and everyday settings. Early reports did not immediately signal a pattern. A missing student here, a young woman gone there. Each case appeared separate, tied to local circumstances rather than something larger. Families searched. Reports were filed, but urgency faded quickly. At the time, law enforcement systems were not built to connect crimes across state lines efficiently. Information moved slowly. Cases were handled locally. What looked like coincidence was rarely challenged as repetition. This allowed Bundy to continue operating without consistent scrutiny. Questions that did arise were often dismissed as isolated incidents. There was no shared framework to identify a single individual moving between jurisdictions. By the time investigators began to recognize the scale of what was happening, the picture had already expanded beyond easy containment. Bundy would later admit to dozens of victims, with estimates exceeding 30. This case is not only about one offender. It is about how mobility, trust, and fragmented systems created the space for long-term harm to continue unnoticed. The danger was not hidden. It was simply never connected in time. What separated Ted Bundy from most offenders was not force or intimidation. It was presentation. He did not rely on fear to control situations. He relied on trust, built carefully in ordinary public spaces. Bundy often appeared with visible injuries. Witnesses recalled him wearing an arm cast, using crutches, or struggling to carry books. These details mattered. They immediately signaled vulnerability, not threat. He approached people politely and asked for small, reasonable favors: help carrying items, assistance to a car, simple requests that did not trigger alarm. His tone was calm. His manner was respectful. Nothing felt rushed or aggressive. These encounters happened in places people associate with safety: college campuses, busy sidewalks, parking lots in broad daylight. The presence of others created an illusion of security. Danger, people assume, does not operate openly. That assumption worked in Bundy's favor. Importantly, people did not ignore warning signs. From their perspective, there were none. Bundy did not behave erratically. He did not pressure or threaten. He appeared educated, articulate, and socially competent. Psychologically, this exploited a common bias. We associate danger with aggression, unpredictability, and visible hostility. Bundy offered the opposite. He appeared controlled, polite, and in need of help. By presenting himself as vulnerable, he disarmed suspicion. Helping him felt safe, even virtuous. People trusted their instincts, and those instincts were shaped by expectations of what danger looks like. This is why his approach was so effective. He did not need secrecy. He did not need isolation. He relied on normal social behavior functioning exactly as intended. In retrospect, the betrayal feels obvious, but at the moment of interaction, it did not. Bundy gained trust not because people were careless, but because he understood how trust is built and how easily it can be misused. Ted Bundy did not manipulate people through fear or force. He succeeded because he understood something more fundamental: how appearance and confidence shape trust. People often judge danger quickly, and Bundy knew how to pass that test without effort. He presented himself as clean-cut and educated. His clothes were neat. His speech was articulate. His behavior was controlled. Nothing about him fit the image people associate with violent threat. This is known as appearance bias, the tendency to assume well-presented individuals are safe. Bundy also benefited from an illusion of authority. He spoke openly about studying law. He volunteered in political campaigns. These details carried social weight. They suggested intelligence, ambition, and legitimacy, without him needing to prove anything directly. Importantly, his confidence was balanced. He did not dominate conversations or appear arrogant. He spoke calmly and clearly, giving the impression of someone comfortable in control of himself. That balance made people lower their guard. Bundy also controlled the narrative of every interaction. He framed himself as harmless, even slightly disadvantaged. He offered partial information and allowed others to fill in the gaps with their own assumptions. When people saw a polite, educated man asking for help, they completed the story themselves. They assumed safety. They assumed good intent. Bundy never had to correct those assumptions. This mirrors a critical lesson seen in other cases. Manipulation does not require complexity. It requires understanding how people interpret behavior under normal conditions. Bundy did not overpower trust. He invited it, and waited for it to do the work for him. As Ted Bundy continued operating across multiple states, there were moments when attention should have intensified. Witnesses came forward describing young women leaving public places with a man who appeared calm, polite, and non-threatening. These accounts were noted, but rarely treated as urgent. Sketches were created based on eyewitness descriptions. The problem was not inaccuracy. The problem was normality. The sketches showed a clean-cut, ordinary-looking man. Nothing about the images suggested danger, and that worked against meaningful follow-up. Early reports were often dismissed as routine missing person cases. College students leaving town, young women changing plans. Each disappearance was handled locally, shaped by assumptions rather than urgency. What was missing was connection. Bundy's crimes crossed state lines: Washington, Utah, Colorado, and later Florida, but investigations did not. Each jurisdiction worked within its own boundaries, unaware of similar cases unfolding elsewhere. At the time, there was no centralized database to link disappearances across states. Information traveled slowly, if at all. A case that appeared suspicious in one region looked unrelated when viewed in isolation somewhere else. This created dangerous gaps. Patterns that might have been visible collectively remained invisible individually. Law enforcement agencies were not ignoring evidence. They were never seeing it together. Witness statements stayed local. Sketches stayed regional. Reports stayed filed under separate systems. What should have formed a warning network instead became scattered fragments. As a result, Bundy was not pursued as a single moving threat. He was treated as a series of unrelated possibilities. Each case reset attention back to zero. The failure here was structural, not intentional. Systems designed to handle isolated crimes were overwhelmed by a mobile offender operating across jurisdictions. The danger was not invisible. It was fragmented, broken apart by geography, time, and institutional separation. Ted Bundy's arrest did not bring immediate closure. Instead, it marked the beginning of one of the most disturbing chapters in the case. In 1974, Bundy was arrested in Utah after witnesses connected him to the disappearance of a young woman. For the first time, law enforcement believed they had finally stopped him. What followed surprised almost everyone involved. Bundy chose to represent himself in court. This decision was not impulsive. He believed his intelligence, education, and confidence would work in his favor. In the courtroom, he appeared calm, articulate, and composed. To observers, he did not resemble a dangerous criminal. He looked like someone in control. That confidence mattered. Bundy used courtroom procedures to his advantage. He questioned witnesses directly. He addressed the judge with ease. His behavior reinforced the same illusion that had protected him for years, that he was capable, rational, and trustworthy. Then came the first escape. In 1977, during a court appearance in Colorado, Bundy jumped from a courthouse window and fled. The moment shocked authorities and the public alike. What should have been a secure environment failed completely. He was captured days later, but the damage was done. Confidence turned into embarrassment. Months later, Bundy escaped again, this time from jail. He took advantage of lax supervision, climbed through a ceiling, and disappeared. This second escape was no accident. It exposed deep flaws in custody procedures and oversight. The consequences were immediate and severe. During the weeks he remained free, Bundy committed additional murders. The failure was no longer theoretical. It was measurable in lives lost. Law enforcement agencies were forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. This was not just a case of a dangerous individual. It was a series of institutional breakdowns, underestimation, overconfidence, and poor containment. Bundy's escapes transformed public perception. The case was no longer about catching a criminal. It was about how a system allowed him to outmaneuver it repeatedly. This was not just failure. It was embarrassment turning into disaster. When Ted Bundy escaped custody for the second time, the consequences were immediate and devastating. He traveled to Florida, a state unfamiliar with his full history, carrying with him the confidence of someone who believed the system could no longer stop him. What followed was an escalation. The crimes committed after his escape were more violent and less restrained than before. Investigators would later note a shift in behavior. The careful manipulation that once defined Bundy's earlier crimes gave way to raw aggression. Time, pressure, and exposure had changed the pattern. These were not isolated incidents. They were the direct result of a failure to contain a known threat. The Florida murders shocked even experienced investigators. The brutality was undeniable. The control Bundy once maintained was replaced by urgency and recklessness. This was not the work of someone trying to avoid detection. This was someone acting without restraint. What makes this section of the case especially disturbing is its preventability. Bundy was already in custody. He had been identified. He had been warned against. The system knew who he was capable of being. And yet he was allowed to escape twice. Each failure added pressure, but also complacency. Warnings were underestimated. Security gaps were overlooked. The belief that he could be managed proved dangerously wrong. For the victims and their families, the timeline matters. These crimes did not occur in ignorance. They occurred after the threat was known, after opportunities to stop him had already passed. This is where the anger in this case becomes unavoidable. The damage caused after Bundy's escapes was not an accident of fate. It was the outcome of decisions made by institutions that failed to prioritize containment over confidence. Each life lost afterward stands as a reminder of that failure. The tragedy is not only in what Bundy did. It is in what was allowed to happen after he should have been stopped. By the time Ted Bundy finally stood trial in Florida, the case had grown far beyond a standard criminal proceeding. It had become a national media spectacle. Courtrooms filled with reporters, cameras followed every movement, and public attention intensified with each new development. The focus, however, was no longer on whether Bundy was dangerous. That question had already been answered. Bundy once again chose to represent himself. He spoke confidently in court, questioned witnesses, and addressed judges directly. To some observers, his composure appeared calculated. To others, it felt detached. What was clear was that the courtroom no longer offered him the advantage it once had. The evidence was extensive, and the timeline was firmly established. The trial concluded with a conviction and a sentence of death. Appeals followed, stretching the process over several years. During this period, Bundy remained a public figure, though the attention gradually shifted from fascination to exhaustion. The spectacle lost its novelty as the reality of his crimes became impossible to ignore. In the final years before his execution, Bundy began offering confessions. These admissions were not sudden or complete. They came slowly, often fragmented, sometimes appearing strategic rather than reflective. Investigators attempted to extract details that might bring closure to families still searching for answers. While some information was confirmed, many questions remained unresolved. Not all victims were identified. Not all locations were disclosed. The confessions provided fragments, not resolution. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in Florida. The event marked the legal end of the case, but not its impact. There were no dramatic final statements, no revelations that changed the narrative. The execution was procedural, controlled, and final. For the families of victims, the moment was complex. Justice, in a legal sense, had been carried out, but closure remained elusive. Years of uncertainty, unanswered questions, and preventable failures could not be undone. The Bundy case ended not with triumph, but with reflection. It forced law enforcement, legal systems, and the public to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, perception, and systemic gaps. The story did not conclude with his execution. It concluded with the understanding that recognizing danger too late carries consequences that no sentence can reverse. The story of Ted Bundy does not end with an arrest, a confession, or an execution. It ends with a question that remains uncomfortable precisely because it is still relevant. Bundy succeeded not because he was invisible, but because he matched what people expected safety to look like. He spoke well. He appeared educated. He behaved calmly. In public spaces, those traits were interpreted as reassurance rather than warning. Because this story is not only about one individual, it is about how easily perception can override evidence and how systems and people can mistake comfort for safety. If there is a lesson here, it is not about fear. It is about attention, about connecting dots early, about questioning what feels familiar instead of dismissing it. This is where the story ends, but the responsibility it leaves behind does not. Thanks for watching.